Well, good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and it's an honor to be part of this epilepsy conference. I thought what I would do today is I would start off with an introduction and give you a little bit of a background as to why I'm here. So my name is Derrick Rumenapp. I'm the keynote speaker today, and I call myself a self-proclaimed resilience champion. You see, over the last few decades, my personal and professional journey has brought many things to light. First, on the professional side, I've had an amazing career in many areas of finance and operations and cybersecurity, as well as enterprise architecture and learning and development. I've seen many changes throughout the world and throughout the business cycles for the company that I work for. Personally, I'm a husband of 27 years. We recently celebrated our 27th wedding anniversary this past August. I'm a parent. I have a 23-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, Matthew, who is the inspiration for me being here today and raising epilepsy awareness. Our family has a strong faith, and that strong faith has really been our shelter in the storm, so to speak. And it's really grown over the years, especially as we faced various challenges. I come from a real small town in upstate New York, just outside of Cooperstown. I grew up in a single family home. I know what it means to kind of grow up as a man of the house, as well as see the stresses and strains of raising a family, not only in my current situation, but also with a single parent. The other thing I'd like to share with you is one of my favorite accomplishments is the marathons that I run each year to raise epilepsy awareness, for the miracle that my son has experienced, and also to raise awareness of the amazing services that are out there. As I got ready for today's keynote, I thought a lot about this journey. I thought a lot about how far we've come in, believe it or not, the last 13 years. It's been absolutely incredible. And as I thought about it, I even get pimples right now just talking about it. I remember that morning. I was in the shower. My wife came into the bathroom, frantic. She said our son Matthew had fallen. At the time, he was 2.5 years old. But not only that he had fallen, but something was wrong. And those words still ring in my ear. Something was wrong. I jumped out of the shower so quickly that I slipped and fell on the floor. And I can almost still feel that impact. And I think it was an inflection point in our lives, almost like an indent in our lives. And as I rushed into the bedroom, because that's where he had fallen, he was convulsing in what would later be diagnosed as a seizure, but we had never really seen a seizure. My daughter had had seizures when she was born. She had had a stroke at birth, but those had gone away, and she had never been diagnosed with epilepsy. So when Matthew fell at 2.5 years old and started having seizures, it was a brand new experience for us. I remember being frantic. I remember doing everything wrong, sticking my finger in his mouth because I thought he had choked on something. I remember how hard he bit down on my finger because you're not supposed to do that. I remember flipping him over and feeling his limp body in my arms as I tried to give him the Heimlich. Again, terrible, terrible, but uninformed action. And that's why we try to raise seizure awareness training, first aid training. I remember calling out to my wife to call 911 as I ran through the development, half dressed, barefoot, pants on, thankfully, knocking on every one of the neighbors' houses that I thought may have some level of medical training. And as I got back after what seemed like a long time, the paramedics were there. They had diagnosed Matthew with what they thought at the time was a seizure, and we brought him to the emergency room. Our heads still spinning, not knowing what was going on. And I remember them saying that it was a seizure, would probably never happen again. And they discharged us with diastat and some paper instructions. This was back in 2009. So things were different back then. Technology has come a long way. I remember going home very, very scared and hoping that that was the last time it would happen. But that wasn't the fate that we would have. And over the course of the next several months, Matthew's condition would worsen. His seizures would go to 50 to 100 a day. We would go to 3 different hospitals. He'd be put on 5 medications. And it makes me emotional just talking about it because I remember. I can feel it. So I know how many of you feel. Our story has a happy ending. By the grace of God and what I call our village. We got our miracle. Matthew was admitted into Boston Children's Hospital. He was put on the ketogenic diet. On Thanksgiving of 2009, and within 3 months, Matthew's seizures stopped. We weaned him off of his medications. He stayed on the ketogenic diet for 2.5 years. He received services and receives a little bit of support now as a 16-year-old, but more or less he's made a full recovery. And as I reflect back over the journey, it was the people that made a difference. It was our village. It was the Epilepsy Foundation of Northeastern New York, here in Albany, that made the difference. They were the ones we called. They were the ones that knew what we should do. They were the ones that comforted us. They were the ones that had the parent support group. It truly took a village for us to get where we are today. And I'm here today as the keynote speaker because I believe our miracle should be paid forward. I believe that their presence, their support, and our tireless advocacy enabled us to make decisions and to get the right resources and to get the right people involved that really led to Matthew's miracle story. Today we raise awareness. Like I said, I do my annual marathon. I raise awareness at the company that I work for. And it's become very, very important to me. That thing in our lives back in 2009 was only the beginning. And what I came to see was that wasn't the only storm that we were going to face. And over the ensuing 13 years, we went through a lot of change in growing our family, in growing our marriage, in navigating my career, in getting our daughter to college, and some of the storms that she was facing as an athlete, getting injured, being out for the season, living through the pandemic, the unfortunate loss of both of my parents at the same time within 8 months, and then some other career-related challenges that were going on. And I bring this up because what I've realized is whether it was Matthew's diagnosis and the subsequent fear and anxiety that it brought, or life in general, life is full of storms. And they bring uncertainty and fear. There's been moments of absolute burnout and depression for me. And it's been challenging. And what I've learned throughout that is that there's lots of information out there, but that I was drowning. I was drowning in the books that I was buying. I was drowning in the videos that I was watching. I was drowning in the webinars I was attending, in the apps that I was downloading, and the websites that I was going to. And one of the most important things that I learned in all of this process, in all of this experience, was that I needed to ask for help. And that help was provided by the Epilepsy Foundation of Northeastern New York. That help was provided by my family. That help was provided by my coaches and mentors and priests, and it was even provided by my company and some of the programs that they have. That realization was so important. There were 6 other things that I realized too along the way. I realized that life is absolutely full of storms and that most of them eventually end. I know a number of you are in the midst of a storm. I learned that the meaning that I give to that storm is really, really important. I have come to believe, and it's not just because of that miracle, because there's plenty of other storms going on in our lives, but that I believe that the storm's happening for me. I believe that storm that we were facing with Matthew's epilepsy brought me here today. It brought me down a path and a journey that I would have never been on, and that it truly did happen for me, and it's opening my eyes to things that I wasn't aware of. It's opened my eyes that there were many times in my storms that I just wanted to run, and that the bison's character, innate ability to run towards the storm versus away from the storm, is something that I want to emulate, and that my life was easier no matter how hard the storm was when I faced that storm and moved forward. The other thing and most important thing was humility, and how much easier life is when you ask for help. And I didn't learn that as much until both of my parents passed away, in settling the estate and taking care of everything and handling the emotional impact. The 5th thing I learned, and again, part of the reason that I'm here today, is many of life's storms can lead us to our purpose. And I believe that the experience that we had was really to bring me here today, to continue to raise epilepsy awareness and to give people hope. To give people the strength and the courage to reach out, not only to ask for help, but then to pay it forward and share that experience with other people. Lastly, what's come from this is that it sounds maybe easy to build resilience into our lives as we face these storms, but I personally needed a process. And from all of this has come a process that I call the resilience habit. And when I think about the challenges that we had, the hospitals that we went to, the fear that we had, watching Matthew have all of those seizures and feeling totally helpless, there's really nothing that make those hard times easy. But what I've come to realize is the hard times in our lives can be made easier. And since that experience and the subsequent experiences, I started to think about, how can I be stronger? Just like if I was going to go to the gym, right? How can I make my life, my mindset, myself more resilient because of life storms? And the first thing that I started to think about were these 3 simple building blocks. The first one was around my own self-love and my own self-care. I know when Matt was sick, we were running frantic. We weren't eating good. We weren't sleeping good. Part of that is just part of the journey and part of the struggle. But I've got a greater awareness now on the importance of self-care. Because I know with my self-care and my self-love, it leads to my mindset. It leads to the way I think about the world. It leads to the way in which I think about the future. And then lastly, those 2 things for me lead to my own self-discipline. Because if I'm not taking care of myself and I'm not taking care of my mindset, I really can't take care of anybody else. And I've proven that time and time again, especially when my parents passed. This resilience habit for me is these 3 building blocks. And the more I thought about it, I realized that there's certain habits in my life that I have, right? And I took the word resilience and I said, how can I use the word resilience as a reminder for me? And I came up with this framework and this habit that I share with lots of folks. And I took the first 3 letters of the word resilience and I said, I'm going to use that to illustrate the habits that are necessary for my self-love. And then I'm going to use the next 3 letters for the habits that illustrate my self-talk. And then the last 4, I'm going to use for my self-discipline. And what I'd like to share with you today very quickly is how this resilience framework continues to help me in my life, no matter what I face, whether it was the things that I learned during my experience with my epilepsy journey, through my own career progressions in raising a family and building a marriage, testing my faith, right up until the point that I lost both of my parents suddenly within those 8 months. I believe for me, intentionally building resilience is the difference now going forward, because storms are inevitable. They will continue, and the stronger I can be and more prepared I can be going into them, the better. 10 things that I try to do that I want to hit upon quickly today that I hope is useful for you is when I think about self-love, I think about just how I bring myself to the day. There were many dark days when Matt was sick, many. And this is not to say there's still not some dark days, but there's more of an awareness that I can choose the way I go into my day, right? The way I start my day. Do I snooze? Do I look at social media? Do I get caught up in the political context of what's going on in the world? Or do I start first with gratitude? Do I get up a little bit early? Do I focus on my priorities? And do I really prepare myself to face the day? I've come to realize that's the first and most important thing I do to illustrate my own self-love and self-care. The next thing is consciously energizing myself. The things I put into my body, whether we talk about proper nutrition, we talk about vitamins, water, exercise, sleep, being conscious that I can't fight the storm, or I can't fight that inevitable battle that's going to come at some particular point if I'm not conscious about the way in which I energize myself. And it sounds basic, but it's been so important in keeping me strong as those next battles ensue and keeping me healthy. The last habit that I think about when I think about taking care of myself is just my schedule. When I look at my schedule, I know if I love myself. I know if I'm taking care of myself. I can see it. Am I making time for the things that matter? Am I taking breaks during the day? Am I getting the proper amount of sleep? Am I exercising when I should? Am I scheduling calls back to back to back to back in my current job, or am I giving myself some breathing room? When I do these 3 things right, the storms are easier. They allow me to face the storm better and work towards the next series of habits that I have when I think about my mindset. Mindfulness has become really, really important, and it came from those dark days. It came from the fear and desperation and thinking that there was no future for us. It came up again when I lost my parents and thinking, well, what's the future now? But when I take care of myself, I'm better positioned for the next 3 letters of the word resilience, which for me is inspect, right? Being self-aware, staying present, knowing the story that I'm living. Part of the storm sometimes makes me feel like a victim. Like, why is this happening to me? Believe me, I had many, many conversations with God about why he was putting us in this situation. But reminding myself to inspect my story and challenge what record is playing in my mind and what story I'm living out helps me sort out and make a decision as to whether or not it's true. But also it helps me sort out what's in my control to face and to move forward with. The other thing that's really important for my mindset is thinking about the leverage that I have. When I'm in that storm, the leverage was the Epilepsy Foundation. It was my family. It was my company. It was my marriage. And I know sometimes those storms for me, I would forget I had any leverage. I would be so overwhelmed that I wouldn't even realize that I had people that love me that I could fall back on. So reminding myself that I have leverage in the storm and knowing what drives me through that storm and that why is so important. The last thing is, when I think about my mindset, is I think about not forgetting that there still is a future. Staying present, avoiding too much fear about the future, but reminding myself that I have an empowering future and that a circumstance or multiple circumstances only dictates the kind of future I have if it lets it. So that empowering future is important. These 2 things I always come back to often, because when I start to procrastinate and I start to struggle, what I realize is I'm not taking care of myself. And I'm no good to others if I don't take care of myself. And if I don't take care of myself, my mindset is very poor. I become a victim I forget that there's a future, and I don't know why I do the things that I do. Forget about my family and my purpose. This leads us to the last block, which is self-discipline. And this is all around, am I taking action? Am I procrastinating? Am I celebrating the progress that I'm making? Am I focused on the things in my life that I can control? That's been a hard putt for me, delineating between what I can control and what I can't control, the serenity prayer. But that execute, is so very important. The other thing that my self-discipline has made me aware of is that I am bombarded from every direction constantly through things I've chosen and things I haven't that are influencing me. So noticing the things I've subscribed to, the things I like, the things I read, the things I watch, the things I listen to, has become very, very important to me in maintaining my own resilience. Being disciplined about, is that something that's actually making me stronger or weaker? Is that something that's helping me or hurting me? Because the way in which those things influence me ultimately influence the way I cope. And sometimes I cope destructively, and sometimes I cope constructively. But just having that habit in there of noticing doesn't mean that I'm perfect. It just means that I know that's a step in the process, and that some things can actually make me weaker if I continue to be influenced by them. The next one is connect, and it's all about people. When I look back over my whole life and my whole experience, I don't remember the things as much as I remember the people. It's the relationships. It's how I'm helping other people. It's how other people are helping me. In that bond, in that connection that makes any storm easier. It doesn't make it easy, right? Storms aren't supposed to be easy. Otherwise, we wouldn't get our strength there. But connection makes me resilient, because I know that I'm not going into this alone. I know that life is not alone. And the more that I ask for help, the more I can give help. Lastly, as I think about my own resilience, I think about the fact that I need to grow. I need to learn. And part of the way I coped with what we went through with Matthew was I went out to the web and I learned everything I can about myoclonic astatic epilepsy. Right? I learned everything I could about idiopathic. I learned everything I could so that when I talked to the doctors, I could articulate it in a way that would be helpful as part of the diagnosis. I tried to be a partner in that process. My resilience in my life, I believe, largely comes back to continuing to try to learn and to grow and to contribute. These 10 habits I have not perfected. I share them today because they're something that's worked for me. I share them today because I believe they're the distilling or the synthesization of all the information that I've read to this point. And I share them today in hopes that maybe there's something here that could help you. In closing, life is full of storms. And some days that's just really hard to accept. Whether it's 7 days straight of rain, or it's the loss of a loved one, or it's the diagnosis that's bringing challenge to our life. Life is full of storms. But how I prepare for it, face it, and respond to it, I continue to believe is my choice. And that will make the storm easier. It'll make it less. I've come to believe that my resilience is a process. And I'm not saying you have to follow my process. I share that out there as a guy who started to pay attention to what was going on in his life and realized that I had to take a little bit more control and a little more self-accountability to build more resilience so that when something bad happened, it would be easier, but not easy. So I would say find what works for you and make it a habit. The third thing, and I've talked about this a lot, is don't go it alone. It truly takes a village. And I don't care if we're talking about epilepsy, loss, life. Life takes a village. And it took me a long time to humble myself enough to ask for help. But it's truly one of the most important things I've ever done. And then lastly is, and this is hard at times, I had to trust my journey. This is a picture of a coffee cup I was drinking out of today, and I actually inserted this into this presentation today. This is a cup that my sister had given me when we were in the midst of all of our storms. And it's been a guiding principle to just trust that journey, focus on what you can control. Because for me, I've found that my purpose and the greatest strength that I've built has been in the midst of all the pain. Thank you for today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you for listening. And at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. Thank you.